So I'd like to reflect briefly on what I might dare to call the abuse of high standards. I'm seeing patterns, and I'm seeing this pattern in a lot of my clients as well. And it's been a strong pattern in my life. And so it's just starting to crystallize as okay, I think I see the the framework of what's going on. Here's the top level idea. I think that it's very easy when you have high standards, and these could be high moral standards of virtue or justice. It could be high standards of achievement, of performance. It could be high standards of behavior. It could be high standards in any kind of realm. But when you have these high standards, it can be very easy to apply a sort of all or nothing thinking to them. To it's either this or it's not good enough. It's either meets this high standard or something is flawed, something is wrong. It's like there's no reason for praise or benefit. Like it's not okay, it's not good enough, it's not something. And especially as autistics, um, we tend to fall easier into this trap of all or nothing thinking. It's not, I don't think it's inherent to the autistic brain, but I think that I think there's a tendencies towards it in the autistic brain. And so it's easy to fall into that, especially when stressed. When stressed, that all or nothing thinking comes out pretty strongly. And autistics are often stressed to varying degrees, sometimes to the extreme. Um, okay, so let me give some of the that's like the top down version. Let me give some examples to build this up from the bottom up. When I was growing up, my dad was unidentified autistic, which we are only recognizing looking back after the fact. Um, but there was many things in I don't want this to turn into dad bashing. I loved him very much, and he was a really, really great dad in many ways. And he was a human and uh, a stressed autistic, and he had his flaws. It's not all or nothing. So let me just preface it that way. But I'm going to bring out a couple of the flaws because this is what I'm talking about right now. Um, so he often applied this sort of high standard to teaching his daughter, and with the absolute best of intentions. He wanted me to do well, he wanted me to succeed, he wanted me to have a good life, he wanted me to be a good person, to like all of these things. And he had very high standards for himself. Um, and he always wanted the best for me. And so often he would hold me to these high standards, and I'm thinking of things like he would expect certain behaviors of me that were more mature than my age level was appropriate for, or he would expect me to be able to do household chores with initiative that was really honestly beyond what a child of that age would be appropriate to expect of them. Um, and when I didn't live up to those standards, it was time for a lecture. Like um, that's how he dealt with a lot of parenting issues, is by lecturing, which is a whole lot better than physical abuse, and a whole lot better than a lot of things that I could imagine. But still, I just hated it. Just absolutely hated it. But also looking back, it's a very autistic way to handle things. Um, um, that little professor stereotype. And it was totally with the best of intentions. He wanted me to do well. He wanted me to be a good person. He wanted to foster a sense of virtue in me. Like when I was learning the violin, he was expecting me to practice kind of with the motivation and the intention of if you are not going to be a concert violinist, there's no point. So if you are going to learn the violin, you better practice to the extent that you would be able to make a career out of this as a concert violinist. And I just liked the violin. I just liked playing. And that constant, he would have seen it as encouragement. I saw it as berating. Um, that constant push to practice, to do better, to be better, to whatever, it took the fun out of it. And after about 4 years, I gave up, and I was just like, I don't want this in my life anymore. I don't want the pressure. I don't want the constant beratement of, have you practiced today? Have you practiced enough? Is it good enough? Like, etc. So here's one example of that. In my teen years, I was involved in a youth organization that had a uniform dress code. And most of the time I was fine with it, but sometimes I was just tired and didn't want to put my hair up in this very tight, very rigid braid that felt like it had 1,000 bobby pins to keep my long hair above my shoulders in their regulation, um, neat fashion. And sometimes I just wanted to not do as good of a job. And my dad would lecture me, as usual, about being consistent and being an example, because I held a leadership position within the organization, and following through. And he would extrapolate it as, like, if I didn't be absolutely consistent every single time and follow what I had agreed to do and set out to do, that it would affect my entire future. And he would, like, show this long litany of ways that this one little thing would start compounding over time. And again, with the absolute best of intentions, he was trying to encourage me, he was trying to help me to do well in life. And it was applying these really high standards of absolute consistency beyond what was reasonable at a human level. Humans aren't absolutely consistent. We aren't machines. We can't always fulfill those high expectations. And even when you do push yourself, which I did every single time after that kind of a lecture, or anticipating that kind of lecture, and so avoiding it, I would push myself. It just built up resentment, and it built up frustration and demand avoidance. And yeah, it wasn't seeing me as a person. It was holding a person to an artificially inflexible standard. Here's one more that example, and then I'll move on. In my teen years, I started getting interested in world religions. I wasn't raised religious at all, but I saw that this was important to so many people in the world throughout history, that I was wondering what there was to it. Like, what was the attraction? What benefit did they get out of it? And so I did a lot of comparative religious studies, and even participated in a couple of different religions for varying lengths of time to figure this out. And there was a period in my last year living at home where I was going to a church, and my dad, again, holding this high standards of, if you're going to do the Christian thing, then you have to actually do what it means to be a Christian. Like, you either do it or you are a hypocrite. And he didn't want me to be a hypocrite, so he would encourage me um, to follow through. For example, on Sunday mornings, if I didn't feel internally motivated to get up on time and to get myself to church, he would come in and wake me up and try to get me out the door, and he didn't care to go, but he was like, if this is something that is important to you, then it has to be important to you and you have to follow through. Um, Again, not taking into account that it's not all or nothing. Like, if I am sick, it's actually not good for me to go there and spread my sickness around to everyone. Like, that is not the point of going to church. But if your standard is you always go to church every single Sunday and with no exception and no reason is okay to not do it sometimes, then I think that that's where some religions fall into the trap of judgment, and some of them are more prone to it than others. I don't want this to turn into a comparative religion thing or a religion bashing. I've had some good experiences and some unfortunate ones. Both of those are true. It's not all or nothing. Anyway, my point about bringing this up is that having these standards, having these goals, having these ideals, having this desire to not be a hypocrite, for example, to live, to walk the walk, to live into it. Those are absolutely wonderful goals, and when they don't see the person and the situation involved, it can lead to hurt. And it's so easy for many of us to get into a comparison mindset of, oh, well, I do this and you didn't do that, and therefore I'm better than you. And it can turn into judgment um, in ways that aren't necessarily intended, but still happen. And sometimes it can get to the extreme. This isn't intended to talk about religion. It's just an area in which this abuse of high standards naturally kind of happens a lot. So I want to share one example of a spiritual community which did this actually really, really well, and a time when it went badly. So after college, I got involved in a spiritual community for about 15 years in total, and had a really, really good experience. This was the kind of community that really lived into the ideals of trying to live into holiness, to become better people, to help each other, to foster healthy relationships. And they did it with remarkably little judgment, if any at all. I really, in all that time, experienced just about no judgment, not even sort of like implied, underhanded, critical, veiled comments. Like, there were no looking at you weird behind your back. There was no underhanded criticism. There was no sort of veiled comments um, or subtext. And I'm hypersensitive to that kind of thing. And I really just genuinely did not sense any of that because it wasn't there. Um, it was like the kind of place where they're just happy when you are there. They're very, very welcoming. And it's just, we're glad you're here. But when I didn't come, when I was too burnt out or too anxious or too busy or whatever, there was no comments about that. There was no expectation that I should do better. None of that. It's just, when I came back, glad you're here. Have some food. And I don't want to give the impression that they were perfect. They weren't. They were humans just like anyone else. But they had a really good handle on what healthy relationships look like. And they helped each other. And they modeled for me how you do healthy relationships, how you can be supportive to other people who are complex people and who have a variety of interesting challenges and triggers and backgrounds and histories, and how you can be there for people, and and they weren't it wasn't just something that you did when you came to services, it was a lifestyle, um, but the kind of lifestyle that was remarkably non-coercive, non-conformity driven. Um, it was just we meet people where they are. We help people where they are. This person needs a ride to services. Great, we'll arrange it. This person needs a ride to medical appointments. Great, we'll arrange that. Um, this person needs help with moving. People show up. So someone needs hearing aids. We'll figure out how to get them. Like people just helped out in each other's lives to the extent that it was requested, but never more. It was never nosy. It was never intrusive. Um, and when people got hurt, as happens in any kind of human relationships, someone says something, does something that has some hurt, they modeled how to repair the relationship, how to handle that kind of situation in healthy ways. Um, and participating in that and seeing it modeled for so many years was honestly a huge part of what helped me heal from my complex relationship trauma and what helped me learn healthy relationship skills. And it's a lot of what I use nowadays throughout my life and in my coaching and just with people in any kind of situation that involves people. I'm not perfect at it. They weren't perfect at it, but I'm a whole lot better. And one of the most important things that I learned from them was the idea that rules or policies or canons or regulations, whatnot, these are all, and I say those all in air quotes, like they are intended to be tools. They are intended to be medicine. And I use those two words specifically. What I mean is that tools are something that helps you develop in a particular direction. Like the rules, again, I use that term very loosely, of, for example, fasting. They encouraged fasting at certain times of the year, around certain holidays, for certain days of the week, for um, for particular purposes. But it wasn't a one size fits all thing. It wasn't just, oh, this is a fasting day, you're supposed to fast, here's the rules, here's what you do. If you're not doing that, you're not doing it right, or you're not doing it enough, or you're not good enough, or we're going to make some comment or criticism about it. There was none of that. It was like, okay, so the idea of fasting is to help you learn certain things. And to the extent that you're able, like to the extent that you have already learned them or that you are working towards that, you might do more of this fasting thing or less of this fasting thing. And also to the extent that your body is able to, you can do more of it or less than of it if you are very old or very young or sick or infirm or disabled, or if you're taking medicine and you need to have food with your medicine. Like you can adjust how much you're doing for what is appropriate for you. And what is appropriate for you can also change over time and in different circumstances and in different phases. You might be able to do just a little bit when you're first being introduced to the concept because it's new and it's hard, but maybe next year you can do a little bit more, but maybe next year you can do a little more, but maybe next year you're kind of sick and you need some more consideration taken and you need to do less of it, and etc etc. Like it's and that's the part where it gets into medicine, like the idea of these tools that we use are in order to help us heal from all of the hurts and damage that happen to us as we exist in this imperfect world. But the dosage is important. Like sometimes you need more and sometimes you need less. And sometimes the dosage is zero. Sometimes something is entirely inappropriate for a person, and that's okay. And this community really understood that. And that's why they didn't have really any judgment, because they understood that everyone was doing the extent that was appropriate for them at that point, and that it was a personal thing, and that they didn't have to explain to anyone. They didn't have to announce how much they were doing. They didn't have to talk about it with anyone else, that it was between them and potentially between them and their spiritual support group or person, that it wasn't their business to know what anyone else's journey needed at that moment, what medicine someone else was taking, what tools they were using. And it was this implicit understanding that it was a private thing, but that the tools are presented in public, but using them as a private thing. The medicine of it, of how it's working in a person, is a private thing, and that they can share to the extent that they choose, but it's never expected, it's never pushed on anyone. Um, and that the dosage, again, is a private thing. And so this is part of how that comparison, that judgment, just evaporated in this community, and how it really didn't exist, because they saw each person as individuals, because the relationship between the person and the community, between the person and the tools they were using, between the person and the particular medicine, like, it was the relationship that was important. Like, each person was an individual, and we exist in community, but we relate to each other one-on-one. And being a part of that very, very strong emphasis on the relationship was what healed a lot of my relationship trauma. And I think it's when that doesn't happen that we often get into situations where someone is hurt, where we apply these blanket standards of, well, fasting is a good thing, almsgiving is a good thing, showing up to services is a good thing, whatever it is. Like, when we have these rules, policies, regulations, expectations, or even virtues, ideals of what is good and right and just and proper, and they're applied indiscriminately, when they're applied without understanding who this person is and how it will affect them at this time, and what is needed for them in their life at this point, when they're not seen as an individual, and when it's not about the relationship, that's when things get hard. It, like when we go on about, well, if you bring food to class, you have to bring enough for everyone, or I can't make an exception for you because then I'd have to make the same exception for everyone. And the thing is, I don't think that those types of things are accurate. You don't have to bring food for everyone just because one person has a faster metabolism and their blood sugar drops faster and they actually need snacks on a regular basis in order to be able to think in your classroom. Like, you don't have to actually provide food for everyone. Some people don't need it or want it or care. And it also isn't appropriate to apply those all or nothing standards across the board. Like, just because you make an exception for one person does not actually mean that you need to make the same exception for anyone else or everyone else. A lot of other people will never even know about it, so they won't care. And it's based upon, like, this idea of fairness. And fairness is a high standard, and fairness is a good ideal. But fairness, when applied indiscriminately, doesn't actually work. Like, it doesn't actually make things fair in the way that we think that it will, in the way that we want it to. Okay, so I said that I was going to talk about one situation in which this went very badly. And okay, so I was part of the spiritual community for a long time, and towards the end of it, right before I was about to move away anyway, um, the director of the community was retiring, and it was long overdue. He was very well deserved. And this new guy came in, and he had he has many excellent qualities and very high standards, but he doesn't quite get the relational aspect of those standards. And so for the previous 3 years I had been living in my van, and since Santa Fe was my home base, I came back to Santa Fe usually a couple of times a year to stay for several weeks to take care of things that I needed to do in town. And this organization had let me park behind their building just as a safe legal place to park. And so when I was coming back through Santa Fe, I emailed the new director, and just to give him a heads up that I was coming back, and kind of this was what I had been doing with parking behind the building, and he knew that had happened. He was familiar with me, and um, we didn't know each other very well, but he was familiar with that had been the procedure for a few years, and I was expecting some kind of response like, "Oh, okay, good to know approximately what dates you'll be here. Look forward to seeing you. See you when you get here." And that's not what happened. The response that I got instead was essentially, "No, that's not going to work for us. I have decided to start a new policy that we're not going to allow anyone to do that anymore. So you'll have to find somewhere else to stay while you're in town. Look forward to meeting you when you get here. Have a nice day." And that was it. And I was a little taken aback, but I tried not to overreact because I had all of these years of relationship training, um, and it had calmed a lot of my old triggers. And I was trying to approach this from a relational point of view, like trying to engage him in a relationship of understanding maybe he has some reasons for this, that their situation has changed, something's happening, maybe there's some construction I don't know about or whatever, I don't know, but trying to give him the benefit of the doubt and trying to approach it very relationally. So I emailed him back. We emailed a couple of times, and then eventually we ended up talking on the phone for more than an hour, and it was me doing all of this legwork trying to reach out to him. He wasn't initiating at all. He wasn't even interested really in discussing it with me. And what I came away with was the impression that the only reason that he had for this new policy was that he had a vision in his mind for what his organization would look like. And he, a van parked behind the building didn't fit into that vision. And I don't know what he was expecting, if he thought that it would make the place look like a dump or something. Like, I had never littered. I wasn't camping in the area. Like, none of that happened. It was just another vehicle parked on the property, and there were a lot of vehicles parked on the property frequently. So, I mean, it never looked bad at all. You probably wouldn't even be able to tell someone was living out of the van. So I don't know what was going on with that, but he wasn't either able or willing to let me in on anything else. So I ended up resorting to trying to understand his point of view while he wasn't really sharing with me what his point of view was. It was more of just no, this isn't not going to happen anymore, and sucks to be you. And as we talked, he kept saying things like he didn't want to differentiate between persons. He didn't want to treat anyone differently, as if that was a good thing. Um, and and it felt like he didn't want to give anyone special treatment, as if treating everyone absolutely the same was a virtue, that treating his children the same as treating other people's children would be a good thing, as if treating the members of the community the same as strangers off the street would be a good thing. Um, but that completely overlooks the fact that you have relationships with people who are in your community, that you have years of built up history with these people, that you know them more than you do strangers who you don't know at all yet. And because you know them, you understand where they're coming from. You understand what they like and what they dislike and what their needs are and how certain things affect them, and that you use that information to have better interactions, to help people, to, in fact, to achieve high values of treating people well, of of understanding people. But it seemed like all of that was being completely overshadowed by the value of not differentiating between persons. And so I ended up resorting to saying things that I would never, ever say under other circumstances, like that I had been a part of the board of directors, and that I had led the youth group for several years, and that I had helped out with services, and that I had participated in different service projects, and that I had done all of these things. And I would have never listed off those types of things before. I would have never needed to. It would never even have occurred to me. But I kind of got the impression that he thought I was saying something like, oh, well, look at me. I donated to the church, and therefore I deserve special treatment. Like, as if someone could buy having their voice heard more than others by donating. And it wasn't about donating. And that's not the point. What I was trying to do by saying those things was to fill him in on information that he didn't have, because he wasn't there for more than a few months, and to let him know that I was a part of this community, that I was, in fact, an actual member of the community, that I had participated in so many different aspects of it, like filling him in on how much I was, like, even though I wasn't there at the moment, that I was very much a member of this family, and that this particular group of people were in many ways more of a family to me than anyone outside of my nuclear family had ever been in my life. And he just couldn't get past, I don't differentiate between persons, and like that is the standard that I'm going to hold to, and therefore you can't park here. And he just didn't get that it wasn't about parking, it was about a relationship. I really didn't care about the parking at that point. I wanted a relationship with him. I wanted to get to know him, and I wanted him to get to know me, and I wanted him to see me as an individual. And it was like he was treating me as some sort of a gestalt or ADOS of a human, and that any other random human that happened to fit into that slot, he would have treated the exact same thing, and that he would have seen that as a virtue. And it hurt, because he wasn't seeing me as an individual. And that was the point. That was the whole problem, is that he wasn't seeing me as an individual. Like, he had this vision for his community, and how people were affected by it was kind of incidental. And what I've seen, because I kept in contact with some of these people in that community, even after I've moved away, because these were my family, is that that's how he's largely approached a lot of other situations. Is like he's got this plan and how people are affected by it is kind of incidental. Some issue arises and he comes up with a solution, and the solution is just it's applied blanket to everyone, and how people are affected by it is kind of incidental. Like, his attitude is like, well, that's your problem, not mine. And that's what I mean when I talk about the abuse of high standards. It's when policies or regulations or solutions or values are applied without taking into account how they affect individual people. That's when people get hurt. And when that happens, especially when it happens over and over and over, that's when it can become abuse. Okay, moving on, I want to give one or two more examples, and I'll try to keep these shorter. I want to give an example about the realm of justice advocacy, because this is something that many of us who really do care about making the world a better place, about improving conditions, about changing the system for the better, can fall into this trap, because we have very, very high standards for justice and for what is right and for what, and we can see what needs to be done to make things better. And yet, sometimes holding to those standards in the attempt to fix certain problems can sometimes create other problems. A good friend of mine works in a financial nonprofit whose stated mission is to end poverty. Now, this is a small local organization in a particular metro area, and they have genuinely done a lot of good in their local area to help real people to make their financial situation better and to improve their financial lot in life. And at the same time, this is a small organization of like 35 staff members, and they're just working in this one metro area, and the CEO of the organization treats their mission as so important, so sacred, so critical that it's like a slap in the face to the poor if you ever rest before poverty is completely eliminated from the face of the planet. And she really pushes her staff to overwork, and I'm concerned about burnout for them and for her. She works till like 1 a.m. every morning. She's never takes breaks, never rests. She's like constantly in the fight of it. And the things that she's doing are excellent. They are important. And Thomas Merton said something like, the trap of the modern activist is overwork. And I think that's really true. When we overwork ourselves in order to achieve justice for other people or for ourselves, it's not actually achieving justice. It might be helping some people, but it's also creating problems for the people who are working in that direction. And I think it's very easy to fall into a trap of, if I have this high standard of justice, of, say, eliminating poverty, anything short of that is the extreme opposite. So if I'm not eliminating poverty, if I haven't yet achieved that setting my goals any lower than that is giving up. It's letting go of the whole thing. Like, might as well just check out. You're not good enough. You'll never get anywhere. Like, people are going to be dying and it's going to be completely your fault. And because you didn't work hard enough, because you didn't push enough, because you let yourself take off at 5 p.m., or because you took a weekend off and therefore people are suffering because of you. And it's very easy to get into this all or nothing trap. And I don't think that that's accurate. I don't think that that's healthy. And I don't think that that's fair to anyone, even the people who are genuinely suffering in injustice. There have been people all around the world for all of history who have had that mission of eliminating poverty, and to put that burden on herself of, this is going to be on me to do this, that's not fair to her. That's not reasonable. It's not possible. Like, she and her little organization in this one little area of the world are not going to eliminate poverty. But setting any kind of lower standard probably feels to her like giving up, or giving in, or resigning herself to just the world sucks and injustice is going to happen. And like, I don't think those are the only options. I think that having these high ideals of justice and virtue and wanting to help, etc., and being a good person, like, those are good things. And having possible goals, having goals that are actually practically achievable, and having standards that are flexible to an individual and to how it affects people, and that can change as circumstances change. I think that is a healthy thing, and that's how we get out of the abuse of high standards, is by treating them as relationships, as tools, as medicine, and adjusting the dosage as needed. Because here's the thing, every medicine can be a poison. It's the dosage that matters. When the dosage is too much, all it does is create frustration and resentment and giving up and backing away, and it triggers defense mechanisms, and it's just one more thing that didn't work, and it's cause for self-judgment or judgment of others. And those are poisons. Those are not healthy ideals. Those are not healthy relationships. But when you see everything that you're doing as a relationship between individuals, when you see how things affect individuals, that's where you can avoid the abuse. And yes, it does take more work. It does require more effort. And it doesn't mean that we can't have any kind of policies or guidelines or whatnot. It's just that they need to be flexible. They can't be that kind of rigid, well, if this hurts you, that's your problem kind of attitude. Like, they need to be adjustable. I think this is why I have such a big problem with bureaucracy, because bureaucracy sets up these policies, these requirements of, you need to have this form in order to be eligible for this thing, or you need to have this requirement fulfilled in order to get this service, or this, like, it's a very regulated way to treat people, but it doesn't actually take into account that most of the time that's probably a useful thing. And in this situation, this particular person, their situation is different, and what they need is to be exempted from that particular requirement. What they need is to not have to jump through 15 hoops in order to get this one service. Like, seeing policies as guidelines that are generally probably a good thing and can be modified when we see that they could use some adjustment, and that exceptions are possible when appropriate. A way this has come up for me in running my coaching business, because I also have very high ideals, and I want to work towards justice and to improve the lives of adult autistic and ADHD humans, and to help people to make a better life for themselves, to understand their neurodivergence, and to be able to figure out the things that they need to heal from the years of hurt and neglect and trauma and pain that's been inflicted on them by a society and systems that doesn't understand neurodivergence, that is inflexible, that is rigid in these ways, and by relationships, even among family and friends, that have often been painful and hurtful because they don't understand healthy relationships. This is basically my mission, is to create better understanding and acceptance of neurodivergence in the world, to create a world in which we don't need people doing things like I do to recover from these kinds of wounds, because the wounds aren't inflicted in the first place. And I know that that is a completely irrationally lofty goal, and it's still what I hope for the world, but it's not my individual, like, I don't expect that I'm going to be able to create that in my lifetime, but it's something that I can work towards. And the work I do is just one small part of that, and other people are working in it. And I understand that I am just part of the network of, there's many people working in this in different ways and in different parts of it and addressing different issues, and that it's not all on me, because there are many of us who are working towards this. Anyway, so just one way that this high ideal has showed up in my practice is that I create these videos on YouTube, and um, and in order to try and further justice and accessibility, I have made transcripts of all of my videos up until this Van Dwelling miniseries. And because accessibility is an important thing to me, it's one of these high standards. And creating those transcripts takes a lot of work. There are AI programs that will do a majority of it, but they also have a lot of errors, and some of those errors are confusing, and they don't really, like, they cloud what I'm actually trying to say. So it's been important to me that to have all of those AI transcripts human edited, even though AI is doing probably 80% of it, it still takes quite a lot of time and effort to go through them to make sure that all of the words are right, within reason. I don't really care about ums. And because it's actually a lot of work to go through it after the fact to make the transcript, a lot of kind of the way that I've gotten around that is by scripting out what I'm going to say in advance and making fairly polished videos. And that's a lot of work. Nothing wrong with that. But I've kind of fallen into this trap of, well, if I'm going to live up to my own ideals of making the world more neurodivergent friendly, then it has to be accessible. And then if it's going to be accessible, there has to be a written version for those people who can't or don't want to listen to the audio version. And if it's going to have the written version, it needs to be an accurate written version, which means it needs to be either scripted out or human edited, so that it doesn't have all of these little weird errors in it. So I gotten myself into this trap of, I need to fulfill all of these things. And what I've noticed is that it actually kind of prevents me from making these more freeform, spontaneous, off the cuff kind of videos. And this little Van Dwelling miniseries that I'm doing right now is my attempt to break out of that. And I haven't decided yet whether I'm going to come back after the fact and make edited transcripts of all of them. There are AI transcripts that are auto-generated in YouTube. But I'm experimenting with this idea of not holding myself to the extreme standard for a while. And it's uncomfortable because I feel like I'm not living up to my values. And those values are also holding me back from putting out a lot of content, because I actually have a couple hundred drafts of videos and articles that I have half done or mostly done or almost done, or a few ideas jotted down for, but that I could produce very quickly and easily and have that content available that would help a lot of people. But because I'm holding myself to the standard of it has to be accessible to everyone by having a written version as well, those drafts stay in my computer unfinished, and so they're not helping anyone. I haven't resolved this yet. What I'm doing right now is just an experiment. I don't know how it's going to work out or what I'm going to decide ultimately. If you have thoughts, I'd actually really like to hear what your thoughts are on this dilemma. But this is, again, going back to my training from my dad of I don't want to be a hypocrite, because I get really annoyed when a new book comes out that I want to read that sounds really good and there isn't an audiobook version of it, because I can't read print very much anymore because I have eyesight issues. I literally can't read more than a couple of sentences. It's too painful. When I'm reading on my computer, I have everything blown up to really, really giant size. It's the only way I can read it. So, like, I understand how frustrating it is to not have something accessible in the only format that you need to have in order to access it. And I don't want to be a hypocrite. I don't want to do the thing that I get frustrated at other people for doing. And all those drafts are sitting on my computer, not helping anyone. And I don't know what the resolution is to this. I know that somehow the resolution involves finding the relationship in it, finding how it affects people, and possibly adjusting how I apply my standards, and possibly also creating a better system for getting work out. Yeah, I don't know exactly how that's going to work out right now, but what I do know is that I have held myself to very, very high standards for most of my life. I have been very, very hard on myself when I have not met those standards. I have been very self-critical, self-judgmental, and I've been very judgmental of other people when they have not met high standards, much more so in the past. After my mindset shifted to understanding relationships in this way, oh, it affected so much of my life, and it melted away my judgment. It melted away that comparison. It melted away most of my negative self-talk, because most of my negative self-talk came from self-judgment. And that judgment came from applying inflexible standards to flexible human beings, irrespective of the situation. And then getting on my own case for not being inflexibly perfect, for not being absolutely 100% always correct. But even machines don't work that way. Even machines have glitches and bugs and overheat and need to shut down for a while. How do you expect a human body, a human brain, a human psyche to be able to uphold that? It's not possible. It's not kind. It's not reasonable. It's not healthy. And this is how high standards can sometimes have the unintended side effect of pain and suffering, and I would even argue, in some cases, abuse. And I've seen this in a lot of my clients who are autistic or ADHD, and they're relating to me stories of how an usually unidentified autistic parent like they're looking back at their childhood, and they're telling me about how they only got feedback when it was criticism, how the only feedback they got was that they weren't good enough, or this is the thing that they needed to fix. Even though they did all of these other things right, here's the one thing that they needed to fix. And I can imagine, totally imagine myself doing this, frankly, that in the parent's mind, they were trying to help the child, to encourage the child, to help them be better, because here's a thing that needs to be fixed. And I can also imagine, because my brain works like this too, that the one thing that was wrong, the one thing that wasn't quite right, is the one thing that would glare out in at them and be like this pulsing red beacon of woo, 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 look at me, this is the thing that needs to be fixed. And so they have to point that out. And I can also imagine, because to some extent this is the way my brain works, and I've done this with children, not wanting to overly praise, because I don't want to foster a sense of entitlement, or a sense of um, everything they do is good and they're always going to get like cheers and applause for every little thing that doesn't deserve it. And but taking those ideals, those ideals of wanting to encourage, of wanting to help the child do better at things, of not wanting to create the expectation of praise for every little thing, those are high ideals and those are virtuous things. But applying them without regard for the individual and the circumstances of the moment, without the relational aspect of, yes, not like I don't want to give out praise indiscriminately, and she did a really good job with this. And I want to encourage that. Like that is a form of encouragement too, of wanting to point out where the child could do better. Yes, absolutely, sure. But when that's the only thing the child hears, when there's not, but they also did this well, this is a good thing, and this is a way that you could make it better. Like when there's only the one thing and not the other, over and over and over and over throughout their growing up years, what results is you have a lot of adults who have these complexes around, I can't do anything right. Like I'll never be good enough. I can't have a positive relationship with my parent. Like all I get from them is criticism. Why would I want to talk to them about like when all I get is criticism? And then I get work because I help people work through this. Honestly, I wish that that my job weren't needed anymore, because people didn't treat kids like that anymore. That would be a really good way. Like that would be a really great reason for me to not have a job anymore. I can do other things. I can have another job. Don't worry about me. But it's when these ideals, like the ideal to not be a hypocrite, when it's over applied, when it's like these ideals are good ideals, these virtues are good virtues, and applying them isn't cut and dry. There are circumstances. I'm thinking of the classic example of, okay, not lying is a virtue. Like I don't want to lie, but if I'm living in Nazi era and I'm hiding some Jews in my basement and the Nazis knock on my door and ask me if there's any Jews in the house, I'm gonna lie, like for their safety and mine. Like that is a virtue. It is a virtue in that situation to lie, because it's protecting a person, it's protecting people. Like this is about relationships. I could keep giving examples. I don't know how long this video has gone on for. Time blindness. I don't know if I'm rambling or if it would be helpful to cite a few more examples. Okay, one last example. In high school, I was taking a calculus class and I was struggling a little bit. I understood the concepts, but kept getting things wrong. So that was kind of on par for me and math classes since about middle school, because I had Irlen syndrome and it wasn't identified yet. So I would often reverse numbers or flip things around in my head, or lose pluses and negative signs would switch in my mind, and I couldn't. It was a visual processing thing. I literally couldn't see things correctly, so I would often end up with the wrong answers, even though I understood the concepts. It was massively frustrating. And anyway, so I managed to get through all of my math classes. I was even in advanced math classes, but I was always struggling, and got extra tutoring, got extra help, managed to get through it. Anyway, this particular semester, I also was having knee surgery, and that's my Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Um, and I was out of school for about 6 weeks in recovery. And so I was really far behind. And it was late enough in the semester that the school, it was past the school's policy period of when you can drop a class. But I was struggling, and I was far enough behind that even after my parents got me some extra tutoring, I wasn't catching up. I wasn't going to be able to make it. I would have just failed the class or come close to failing. And honestly, there's really no point in that. So I wanted to drop. My parents were supportive, and the school agreed with that in theory because of I was out so long for the surgery, but it was past their official drop period. And my parents argued. My mom especially went to bat for me and really argued on my behalf to let them make an exception to let me drop the class. And in the end, they finally justified it to themselves to let me drop because the teacher uh, lied about something that she did, and when we had actual evidence that never happened. Um, so I think that was how the school justified to themselves making the exception to the policy. But that kind of a blanket policy of you can't drop past this date, there's a decent reason for that kind of a rule. It prevents people from just going through most of the semester and then deciding at the last minute, oh, well, if I'm going to get an F, I want to drop to avoid that. Like, but like not giving any effort in the class, or, I mean, it prevents abuse of the policy essentially. But not all exceptions are someone abusing the system. I had been out for 6 weeks of school, and I managed to catch up in all of my other things, but math was the thing that I was always struggling with. So that was the hardest thing for me to catch up in. And I just wasn't able to do it at that point, despite working really, really hard at it. So at a relational level, like, this is about this particular circumstance, this particular student. Like, this was not a student trying to abuse the system. This was not a student trying to get away with something. This was a student doing their honest best and just not being able to cut it because of circumstances outside of their control, because of a health situation. If they had stuck to their guns and said, this is our policy, you can't drop, it would have lowered my GPA. It would have had long-term effects for me getting into, or potentially getting into colleges. It turned out that wasn't an issue for the college I went to, but it could have if I had had other plans and wanted to go to other colleges. It could have affected me long-term. For what? Because I had surgery? Not because I was trying to get away with something. So what I'm trying to say is my overarching concept here is that when policies, when ideals, when virtues, when standards are applied indiscriminately without taking into account this particular person, this particular situation, their particular needs, what's really going on here, that's where hurt arises. That's where unintended consequences happen. the bad kind, not the good kind. That's where sometimes trauma can happen. It's where sometimes abuse can happen, especially if it's ongoing, repeated. And I know a lot of people, myself included, who have put in a lot of work to heal from that kind of abuse. Not the abuse of a single person doing one single horrible thing, the abuse of 1,000 paper cuts, of a small thing repeated over and over and over. That's called complex trauma. And sometimes it is perpetrated by one particular person in our life who has these high standards that they hold you to without regard for anything else, without regard for the person, the circumstance, the needs of the moment. Sometimes it's by a lot of people. This is part of the reasons that I have a lot of problems with bureaucracy, because bureaucracy kind of works in this way. Bureaucracy is largely about having these kinds of policies that apply blanket to everyone, and often it can be very painful. But the antidote to that is relationships. It's seeing people as individuals. It's taking the circumstances into account. It's seeing the needs of the moment. It's understanding what's really going on here. It's using standards and values and justice and virtues as medicine that is only good insofar as it helps and needs to be applied at the correct dosage of the correct moment. And every medicine can be a poison when over-applied. It's the dosage that makes the difference. Okay. I'm curious what thoughts this is sparking in you as you're hearing me talk about this. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts in the comments, understanding that that's not what's appropriate for everyone. It's not a blanket thing. It's an invitation if it's desired. Is this resonating? Have you had experiences being on the receiving end of inappropriately high standards? Have you applied them to yourself or to others? I would love to hear some of your experiences in the comments. If you're interested in sharing, and I think this is quite common. So I suspect that there are a lot of stories to share for those who would like to. And last question, is this something that you would like to hear more about from me at any point? Because I feel so many other threads and related parts of this that I could talk about, but I suspect this video has already probably gone on quite long enough. But would you be interested in hearing more about any of those other related aspects at some point? Let me know in the comments. Okay, I wish you a near wonderful day.